here this is a question of his sentence ultimately. Let's go back in and hear more from the psychologist who evaluated Crumbley.
And it never happened.
What did you find out about the purchase of the gun and then going to the shooting range?
So there seemed to have been discord between his parents. I think his dad bought the gun out of spite, and then his mom took him to the shooting range out of spite because they were arguing. So there was constant just discord and family dysfunction.
And in your interview with Ethan, did he report that he was ever taken to any sort of doctor to deal with this?
In my review of the record, there was no indication that he was ever taken to a doctor.
In your interviews and your discussion with him about the constant situations that were going on, was there constant arguments about divorce and which parent that Ethan would choose?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can you explain that a little bit?
So, yes, there was frequent harsh discussions about infidelity, suicide, and which parent Ethan needed to choose to live with when they separate or the event that they separated.
Okay. Were you able to look at the text messages between Ethan and his friend over the months leading up to November?
I did.
All right. And what's the significance that you found with those text messages?
So, in reviewing those text messages, let me just say, Ethan had no idea that these text messages were going to be made public. And so he was having private conversations with his friend. And in one of his text messages, which is on their screen, he says that my mom thinks I'm taking drugs, but she doesn't worry about my mental health. In another of the text messages on the screen, he said, I have a in the shower. And in the text messages also, he said, from what my mom said last night, I went outside in my shorts, and I have no recollection of that event. And in another text message on your screen, he said to his friend, I am hallucinating. And he said, I hear like people talking to me. These were actual text messages back and forth between himself and his friend.
Okay. I want to move next to part 3, which is the Oxford school system. Were you able to take a look at the counseling that was available to Ethan at the school, as well as the reports surrounding the school's interaction with Ethan the day prior and the day of the incident?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. Were you able to look at Oxford school system and their counseling program, as well as the interaction that the school system had with him the day before, as well as the day of the incident?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And can you explain what you found?
So what I found was that in terms of the available resources for intervention, it did not appear to me from my review of the information that he was afforded any type of mental health assistance.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next one. All right. You also mentioned in your report implicit bias. What is that?
So implicit bias it's sort of like the unconscious forces. You know, I can use an analogy of a peanut butter jar, which is actually on one of their slides. Mm-hmm. And so a child learns how to use peanut butter from a jar, mm-hmm. because the child is taught by the parent how to do that. They learn how to unscrew and cork and unscrew the peanut butter jar to get peanut from the peanut butter. So after a while, they learn it so well that they're able to do it unconsciously. And the grooves on that bottle represent the grooves that society grooves us with, so that we have certain perception of things and people. Well, that's how implicit bias works. Let me give you another quick example. I was in court in Detroit and about to step into the elevator, and there was an attorney and other people. I was dressed in suit and tie, and the attorney turned to me and said, "Counsel, come on in." I'm not an attorney, but he made the assumption based on how I was dressed and how I comported myself that I was an attorney. Well, that's how implicit bias works. So it's not necessarily a bad thing nor a good thing. It's a thing, but it can have deadly consequences if it's not used appropriately.
Okay. Now, you also stated that you had a chance to look at the resources that were available to any high school student at Oxford High School. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And is there a rubric or is there a standard that is required for a school to have counselors, to have support staff, or to be able to help the students when they have issues?
Certainly. So the American School Counseling Association, known as ASCA, this is sort of like the monitoring body that makes recommendation in terms of social worker to student ratio. So the recommendation is that there be minimum one social worker to about 250 students. And what that body says is that if you have a ratio of one social worker to 1,000 students, you are not even getting into the classroom.
Okay. Were you able to find the data, and I know that it's contained in your report, regarding Oxford in the year prior and the year of the incident?
Certainly.
Okay. And Your Honor, just because they're numbers, I ask if it's okay that he refer to his notes just to get the numbers correct.
Thank you. Any objection? No, Your Honor. Thank you. You may, sir.
So in the 2019-2020 school year, what was the social worker to student ratio in Oxford?
So it was approximately one social worker to about 1,000 students.
What about 2020 to 2021?
It was one social worker to about 900 students.
And then what about 2021 to 2022?
It was about 1 to about 900 students.
Okay. So you went even a step further to look at suspensions and expulsions. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings?
So in my research in the Oxford school system, just in terms of raw data, I saw that whites comprised about 80% of the school district's enrollment, and blacks comprised, I think, about just under 5%, and Hispanics about 12%, which is reflective, I believe, of the society. So there was nothing revealing about that. However, when you begin now to disaggregate the data, because data tells you something, so that when you begin to disaggregate it, you see a pattern which is visible on your screen. So whites, 80% enrollment, and in terms of suspensions, 68% of the students suspended were whites. Blacks, enrollment, 5%. Suspension, 12%. let's look at expulsions. Again, whites, 80% of the population. Expulsions, 44%, so about half. Blacks, 5% of the population. Expulsions, 22%. Hispanics, I think about 12% of the population. Expulsions, 22%. What this data is telling you is very significant, is that all the students are suspended or expelled at a disproportionate rate when considered to the majority population. And then when you dig a little deeper, you have to ask yourself, what are we missing? And as it pertains to Ethan, as you will see, is that the students are not subject to the same degree of rigor, which is why implicit bias is so important.
Okay. And can you explain, just so it's clear, how implicit bias ties into these findings?
Absolutely, because if you believe that a student is not a problem, you are less likely to pay attention to that student. Even if you are shown overwhelming evidence about problems.